Chapter 4. Healing during the rise of the Christian Church. Evil demons in the healing arts. Holiness demonstrated only through miracles. Galen and Avicenna. The plagues of the Dark Ages. Mumia. The wax of mummies. Our great misfortune of having been born obedience to the doctor and to God. The age of witchcraft. The devil's obsession. The causes of the plagues. Paracelsus, the mystic physician. The Protestant Reformation. The diverging of paths. The end of the Christian healing ministry. The Christian ministry of healing is based on the words of Christ, the miracles he performed, and the power he gave his disciples to heal the sick. The early Christians' attitude toward the importance of mystical healing can be summarized in the words of the Apostle James, "Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them, and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven." James 5:14-15. Regarding the miracles of Christ, the devout Alexander Cruden wrote, "Our Savior confirmed the doctrine he taught with a train of undeniable miracles. They were so great in their nature, so real and solid, so divine in the manner of performing them, by the power of his will, so sacred in their purpose, to confirm a doctrine which becomes wisdom and other glorious attributes of God, and fulfills the prophecies related to the Messiah, who was foretold to come with miraculous healings, which no one could perform without the omnipotent hand of God." If any doubt remains about the importance of miracles in proving and justifying the Christian dispensation, these few lines are quoted from the Vatican Council. Ses. 2, Canon 3:4. If anyone says that miracles cannot be performed, or that it can never be known with certainty, or that by them alone the divine origin of the Christian religion cannot be properly demonstrated, let him be anathema. When the Church relied so heavily on miracles as proof of its divine status, it almost immediately fell into serious difficulty. Most of the pagan religions that flourished in the early centuries of the Christian era could also invoke a miraculous event to justify their divine nature. To extricate themselves from this awkward situation, the early church fathers turned to the second chapter of the second epistle to the Thessalonians, which describes the man of sin, which would come with wonders from the hand of Satan. Through various improvisations on this subject, it was demonstrated, to the satisfaction of the pious, that all miracles that did not arise within the Christian faith were traps and deceptions, originated by the devil and calculated to destroy all those who took them into account. This solution invited disaster, as it stigmatized all non-Christian beliefs and set the stage for a vast program of religious intolerance. The devil became the ruler of 3/4 of the earth. The Church had set itself the heroic task of fighting his power in the 4 corners of the world. And, as might be suspected, non-Christians did not take seriously the idea that they were Satan worshippers, and as the centuries passed, the inevitable consequences of these theological pronouncements were the holy wars and the crusades. In addition to various healings of physical illnesses, the Gospels attribute to Jesus the power to cast out demons. He cast 7 demons out of Mary Magdalene, and in Gerasa he caused a legion of evil spirits to leave a man and enter a herd of pigs. Miracles of this kind justified the theological doctrine of demonic possession and strengthened public belief in the reality and power of evil. Such was the authority of these writings that the medieval church undertook extensive studies of demonology, and the expulsion of evil spirits became an important part of healing. Practices during the Middle Ages, evil demons in the healing arts. As the various isolated Christian communities of the first 3 centuries coalesced into a single larger assembly, the historic church began to take shape. Much of its symbolism and many of its rites were inspired by the pre-Christian religions of India, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Every effort was made to conceal this borrowing, but from the broader perspective of current knowledge, the borrowings are evident. The Christian doctrine of the canonization of saints, it seems to me, came directly from the Hindus, the Buddhists, and the Greeks. Because of the importance of saints in the Church's religious healings, it seems worthwhile to examine this phase of the spiritual tradition more closely. Holiness demonstrated only through miracles. In the early years of Christianity, canonization was carried out by local communities. This supports the belief that it was copied from some pre-existing formula. In the 10th century, the Pope reserved this power for himself. Since then, canonization has been an elaborate process that often takes centuries. The servant of God, in order to be canonized, goes through 3 steps. First, he becomes venerable. Then, after further consideration and evidence, he advances and is known as blessed. If further investigation demonstrates his worthiness, he receives the final honors, and the word saint is placed before his name. Except in the case of martyrs, it is customary for the state of sanctification to be discovered through miracles performed during the saint's life and proven through miraculous intercessions after death. When a candidate for canonization has advanced to the state of venerable, at least 2 significant miracles performed through the intercession of the servant of God must be proven before they can be recognized as blessed. Furthermore, these 2 miracles must occur through the intercession of someone already considered blessed before the canonization process can be completed. One who is blessed may receive local veneration, and prayers may be directed to him under certain conditions, but only after canonization can he be regarded by the whole body of the Church. Saints were important in the mystical medicine of medieval Christianity, and even in the Catholic Church today. They were selectively invoked by those suffering from various ailments. Prayers were offered to Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Valentine for epilepsy, Saint Vitus for nervous disorders, and Saint Anthony of Padua for difficult childbirth. Amulets, bearing the image of different saints, were used for protection. One of the most popular was the St. Christopher medal, which was believed to protect travelers from the dangers of their journeys. Although the early Church had an elaborate theory of illness and healing through divine grace, it does not appear to have interfered with the secular practice of medicine. Many of the great leaders of the Christian faith, including St. Augustine, were physicians. As long as the practitioner of medicine did not become involved in theology, it was normal for that time to practice medicine anywhere. It was good that the Church didn't complicate the lives of doctors any further. They were already having enough trouble with the patron saints of their own profession. There was Galen to make things difficult, and then there was Avicenna to make them even more so, and then with both of them, the confusion only got worse. Galen and Avicenna. The greatest of the Greek physicians who practiced in Rome was Galen, Claudius Galen, born in Mysia in 131 BC. His fame in medicine earned him the appointment of official physician at the gladiatorial school in Pergamon, the city of his birth. He treated several Roman emperors, and according to Arab tradition, died in Sicily around 201 BC. In anatomy, Galen is known for his dissection of animal bodies, but he did not have the opportunity to conduct a detailed study of human structure. In physiology, he was influenced by Hippocrates' theory of the 4 humors, and sought to correct imbalances in them with sympathetic and antipathetic remedies. Galen was very inclined toward magical practices and placed more faith in amulets than in drugs. According to Cullen, he is believed to be the creator of the anodyne necklace so famous in England. Avicenna, Ibn Sina, a Muslim philosopher and physician, 980 to 1037 BCE, was a student of Galen's writings and his principal interpreter among Eastern and later European nations. He incorporated many opinions drawn from Aristotle, blended them with considerable Neoplatonic traditions, and drew much inspiration from his studies of the Quran. Like Galen, he had very little actual knowledge of the human body and its functions. Both Galen and Avicenna left behind voluminous writings, and their books became the official texts for medieval physicians. These invaluable treatises were interminable volumes, rich in lofty generalities and laden with philosophical discourses on every subject, from stomach aches to injuries from falls, with occasional references to volcanoes. Undoubtedly, the books of Galen and Avicenna set back medical progress for hundreds of years, but in their time, there was no remedy or relief outside their authority. Galen was the god of medicine, and Avicenna was its prophet. The plagues of the Dark Age. The 1,000 years from the 4th to the 14th century is the period generally known as the Middle Ages, with the first 600 years graphically designated as the Dark Ages. What happened to nature and human progress after the fall of the Roman Empire is almost a mystery. The only thing that can be said with certainty is that European civilization was in crisis for a millennium. The wisdom of classical civilizations was lost, and it was not until after the Crusades that the minds of men finally shook off the inertia of those melancholic times. Many have asked whether the Christian Church was responsible for the Dark Ages. In some ways, perhaps, but overall, it was also a victim in common with everyone else. The primary cause seems to have been the collapse of pagan Rome, since with it disappeared the law and order of its time. A secondary cause was the closure of the schools in Athens by Justinian in 529 AD. The Church may have been partly responsible for this, but the emperor himself was largely to blame. H.G. Wells, in A Brief History of the World, has a different view of the matter. Perhaps it is not true, he writes, to say that the world became miserable in that dark age. It is closer to the truth to say that the violent and vulgar fraud of Roman imperialism, that world of politicians, adventurers, landowners and financiers, collapsed into a sea of misery that was already there. Wells's analysis is provocative, but it is rather strange that a great cultural system, built over thousands of years of human endeavor in a dozen highly civilized nations, and capable of surviving the vices of imperial Rome, should have perished with the fall of a system of which it was never a part. The arts and sciences were not driven to Islam solely by the Roman debacle. It is more likely that an ignorant aristocracy will take the place of a corrupt one. The first act of an ignorant person in power is always to persecute scholars. According to the scant history that illuminates the Dark Ages, it would appear that a succession of plagues and fevers ravaged most of Europe. These almost always followed in the wake of war. Attila's armies were defeated as they invaded northern Italy. The barbarians had shattered the existing way of life and brought nothing in their place. Men wandered aimlessly, spreading chaos and plague. Earthquakes added to the general misery and terror, and entire cities vanished from the earth. Famine also swept the continent. The death rate was appalling. By establishing the monastery system, the Church did what it could to preserve the remnants of culture, but only those aspects that did not conflict with the dogmas of the faith. The great texts of medicine, art, and music were preserved in monastery libraries, along with many of the oldest sciences, such as mathematics, geometry, astronomy, logic, rhetoric, and languages. These monasteries were virtually the only schools, and the clergy, with no ties to the outside world and ample time for study, became the only literate class. As the temporal power of the Church grew, Europe slowly became organized. The Benedictines were builders of monasteries, and in time they added schools to their holy houses. From these simple schools grew the great universities that would become the pride of Europe. The Church sponsored the universities generously, and kings and princes followed suit. Lack of knowledge was the main impediment to the progress of these schools. 4 branches of learning were favored: literature, law, medicine, and theology. To enter the universities, it was generally necessary to sign a declaration stating that the applicant was a Christian, over 20 years old, a free person, not a peasant, and from a good family. Then, as now, there was also a significant financial consideration. The curriculum was impressive but sterile. Hooded scholars lectured from golden thrones or simply read from ancient texts, and the students sat, listened, believed, accepted, and felt overwhelmed, but not informed. Neither science nor the church was to blame. There was no one who knew more to guide others down a better path. Medical schools were no different from the rest. They were large, imposing necropolises where somber professors murmured over the dead books of Galen and Avicenna. Diseases were treated with mathematics, and remedies were prescribed because herbs resembled the affected organ. For example, cardamom was recommended for toothaches, ivy for nerves. These were the days of unicorn horn and bezoar stones. Those modern churchmen who liked to argue for generations about the respective dignities of the 3 persons of the Trinity might be interested to know how physicians of that era entertained themselves. Mumia, the wax of mummies. The hooded scepter-wielding physicians grappled with the momentous problem of comparing the medicinal properties of the Arab-Egyptian pizzafalto and Lebanese mummies. The Arab mummy was a waxy exudation from ancient bodies that had been mummified with aloes, myrrh, saffron, and balsam. The Egyptian mummy was a similar exudation from the humble dead who had been preserved with asphalt alone. The pizzafalto mummy, highly recommended by Dioscorides, was made from crystals found in the bodies of mummies embalmed with bitumen. But this is very difficult to verify, and apothecaries widely falsified it. The Libyan mummies were derived from bodies that had been swallowed by Libya's quicksand and had not been embalmed. This fascinating question was finally resolved with the discovery of an even more important mummy, which may have been made from the moss growing on the skull of an executed criminal. Such was medicine in ancient times, when men feared the doctor more than disease. Medieval physicians didn't burn lamp oil at midnight in a consecrated quest for new medical ideas. They were rather impressed by their own magnificence, boastful and self-satisfied, and ready to murder any fellow physician whose originality threatened their peace of mind. The prince, the priest, and the physician were members of closed corporations. They banded together to support one another in times of trouble, and when fortune smiled upon them, they plundered one another, fully aware of their actions. At the height of the clergy's power, the iron fist of ecclesiastical displeasure fell not on physicians, but on astronomers. Men like Bruno, Galileo, and Copernicus threatened to disrupt the Christian world order because they directly challenged the teachings of the fathers, who had been taught that the earth was God's throne and that the entire mystery of creation resided on this planet. When Copernicus stopped the sun and made the earth revolve around it, he surpassed Joshua, who only stopped the sun. The church acted against these men with genuine sincerity, but with a lamentable lack of understanding, to rein in these innovators before they shattered the universe. It does not appear that the early church made any effort to limit the study of medicine or to have spoken out against its practices. The church respected the physician. According to the authority of Ecclesiasticus 38, 1-4, honor the physician because you need him, for the Most High has created him. The Most High has created medicines from the earth, and the wise do not despise them. The church was the only institution large enough to demand consideration from all the factions that made up medieval life. Unfortunately, the church fathers lacked a health conscience. They honored the physician, but did not inspire him to strive to improve the health of his world. For the extremely devout, the doctor was just another cross to bear in a world of pain and misery. In many cases, This attitude could be justified by the appalling way in which healing was practiced. Paracelsus cried out in the agony of his spirit against cruel surgeons and physicians, saying, "Fortunate is the man whose doctor does not kill him." Early Christian psychology reveals the profound influence of Roman decadence and degeneration. The corruption of the Caesars and the unspeakable debauchery of the aristocracy instilled a repulsive force in the early church that turned against all worldly things, including life itself. In an effort to protect its followers from the evils of the age, the church condemned the excesses of the flesh, taking its pronouncements to such extremes that it violently disrupted normal life patterns. Our great misfortune of having been born. For the mind once established in the concept of sin, it is not difficult to see faults in the simplest and most natural habits and customs. Nothing is good or bad, it is thought that makes it appear so. In practice, theology saw evil everywhere because it was thinking about evil. The world was considered corrupt in every aspect. The greatest misfortune was to be born into the physical state, and the greatest blessing was to die on the day of birth. This religious viewpoint reflected the condition of the world itself. People had little hope of physical safety or happiness during the Dark Ages. Life was a painful ordeal, fraught with trouble and devoid of hope until the very end. Disease and poverty were universal, and tyranny fell cruelly upon all. Those who did not die from sickness or starvation perished on the battlefield. It is no wonder that in such an atmosphere a doctrine of bodily misery and incorporeal bliss flourished. It was inevitable that people would dream of death as liberation, deeming it desirable to leave this world behind. In a world of suffering, pain became a virtue. For the medieval Christian, happiness was dangerous, as joy could cause the mind to forget the grim reality of ever-present temptation, and could also lead to sinful actions. It seemed obvious that the longer a person lived, the greater the opportunity and temptation to make mistakes and commit wrongdoings, with their eternal salvation depending on their impeccable conduct in this life. The sooner they left the mortal world, the better. In addition to these negative considerations, the Church presented a very positive reason why it was not good to live too long. Those who died in the faith of Christ passed on to a better life, where, close to the noble saints and martyrs, they could be one with the legion of the blessed who had gone before. One of the great authorities of the Church, Saint Augustine, wrote in a moment of ecstasy, "O Lord, let me die, so that I may see you." The Church did not encourage men to hasten the end by any unnatural means, as this would be contrary to the will of God, who gives each person the burdens they must bear. But the Church certainly did not inspire medieval medicine to seek ways to prolong life either. Under a doctrine that taught that all misfortunes were sent by God and should be borne without complaint or sin, there was a sense of completeness about things. There was no need for change or correction. Saint Alphonsus was a man of such profound piety that Pope Pius VII wished to preserve as relics 3 fingers of his right hand. These were the fingers that held the stylus with which he wrote down his inspired thoughts. Saint Alphonsus lived to an advanced age, but his health was always poor, and for many years he endured his physical pains with patience and humility. His words were considered to express the highest form of Christian teaching on matters such as health. "We must be resigned," he wrote, "under the pressure of bodily illnesses, and we must embrace them willingly in the manner and for as long as God wills. Nevertheless, we must employ the usual remedies, for this is what the Lord also desires. But if they do us no good, let us unite ourselves to God's will, and this will do us far more good than health. O Lord, let us say, I do not wish to get better nor to remain sick, I will only do your will. Obey the doctor and God." The miracles resulting from prayer indicated that God in his wisdom had been moved to alleviate the suffering of certain people. The miracle therefore was the perfect remedy, because it further revealed the will of the deity. Medicine, on the other hand, sanctified to a lesser degree, could address the ailment. Then, if a cure occurred, it was to be understood that God had worked through the physician. To quote St. Alphonsus again, when a doctor had prescribed something for him, he would say, "If I take your medicine, it is because obeying you is obeying God." In the medieval world, there was no place for any form of metaphysical healing outside the church, and there was very little need for separate healing cults. Those seeking health through prayer and meditation could fulfill their mystical yearnings in the cathedrals, churches, and temples of their faith. Or, if they chose to rely on physicians, these were available for a fee, and their remedies were either effective or certainly sensational. Funds permitted, they could even have, then as now, a consultation with tasseled physicians. However, there was a thin margin of unorthodox magical medicine, a margin that was to grow so large and so heavy that it eventually shook the foundations. The poor had little hope of receiving medicine from the elegant physicians who served the nobility, and under the feudal system, even less hope of purchasing expensive remedies like the Pisafalto mummy. They had to rely on simple home remedies. So the humble and the poor followed the small path that led to the edge of the village, where an old widow made medicines amidst bunches of herbs. The elderly and the lonely had hard times in those days, and if their skill allowed, they would make potions, nurse the sick, and trade in spells and elixirs. Respectable physicians usually had a stuffed crocodile to adorn their reception rooms, but widows couldn't afford such grandeur, so they hung a dead owl or bat instead. All this seems very childish by today's standards, but in the 13th century, even the smallest detail carried an air of importance. It seems that these ancient herbalists, at least on some occasions, gained considerable renown for their remedies, and important people came to consult them. Then, it wouldn't be long before the robed physician appeared on the scene in great anger. His personal reactions were precisely those of the modern practitioner if his highest-paying patient were to abandon him for a local naturopath. But the medieval doctor was not to be mocked by a widow. He promptly accused her of being in league with the devil, and the temperament of the time did the rest. The age of witchcraft. Medieval European civilization was overshadowed by the most sinister creature ever conceived by the human mind, the devil. For centuries, this monstrous hallucination reigned supreme in Christendom, stifling the normal growth of human thought. If the Romans had a goddess for every desire, medieval Europeans had a demon for every corner. No one ventured out at night, because any of the evil spirits might be lurking under doors and in dark corners. In some of the old churches, imps were carved beneath the pews, and a person was not safe from harm even while praying at the altar. These spirits were not kindly sprites, like the nymphs and dryads of classical mythology. The demons of the medieval imagination were hideous, soul-devouring monsters, and the poor, uneducated huddled together in their cradles and huts, their teeth chattering with fear whenever a gust of wind rattled the roofs or murmured in the chimneys. Ghosts galloped at night on skeletal steeds. The dead came from churchyards in tattered sheets. The Prince of Darkness himself appeared at the crossroads, and witches and sorcerers smeared their bodies with human fat and rode broomsticks to the infernal rites of the Goat of Mendes. Priests exorcised demons from half-demented creatures that howled on cathedral steps. Princes and dukes hired private sorcerers to cast spells against their enemies and concoct poisons to further state conspiracies. The few enlightened souls who raised their voices against the prevailing madness were silenced by the rack and the gallows, and afterward, dark magicians stole the mutilated bodies to mix the flesh with their infernal potions. This was the age of witchcraft, and it brought misery to millions and horrible death to hundreds of thousands. Men denied the right to think, ceased to be men. They became savage creatures again, with all the fears and terrors of that state. The devil's obsession. Demonism in Europe was the direct result of a feudal system that kept countless human beings in a state of ignorance and illiteracy for the benefit of their lords. Let's examine some of the factors involved in the mass craze for medieval witchcraft. Belief in a personal demon, as taught by the Church, resulted in an obsession with the devil. Solemnly warned to always be on guard against temptation, people eventually reached a state of mind that made them see temptation everywhere. The devil became a mental reality, whose form could be conjured by the imagination at the slightest provocation. Shadows took on demonic shapes. Cows were tried for witchcraft by juries. The fear of evil, as a result of the excessive emphasis on the doctrine of sin and damnation, literally frightened people beyond their intelligence and common sense. Primitive pagan beliefs were still close to the surface of Central European minds. Because cities and towns had little contact with one another, these beliefs remained relatively uninfluenced by outside influences. The blending of Christian and pagan ideas, without any means of organizing them, resulted in a strange religious conglomeration, formed from the worst of all the religions and cults involved. Personal fear, exacerbated by collective terror, brought out the least desirable aspects of human nature. Everyone was afraid of their neighbor, and everyone feared anyone whose knowledge surpassed their own. There was a collective hysteria that knew no bounds of reason, and it quickly led to a demoralization of the entire spiritual perspective. The gift of psychic phenomena singled out its possessor as a particular victim. No civilization has reached maturity without some people being born into it, with mediumistic powers, varying degrees of clairvoyance, and the ability to hear voices or predict events. During the witch hunts, all these curious yet entirely natural gifts were used as proof that their possessors were allied with the devil. The subconscious mind of medieval man was burdened with complexes and fixations due to his unfortunate religious convictions. A general neurosis had also arisen from the inhibition of all his natural impulses toward happiness and pleasure. The psychological elements in the pattern are obvious. All of Europe was obsessed with the concept of evil and frustrated by inhibitions. These had to erupt somewhere, and they did, with terrible consequences. The witch traveling through the air on a broomstick was simply a neurosis returning home to rest. Purely personal and selfish factors also played a role. A man wishing to exact a horrific revenge for some real or imagined illness only had to accuse his enemy of witchcraft. The cumbersome machinery of the ecclesiastical courts would spring into action, and the enemy would be utterly disregarded. In some places it wasn't even necessary to file a personal complaint, as boxes were readily available to receive anonymous accusations from those afraid to appear in person. It is reasonable to believe that a high percentage of the victims were victims of personal animosity and greed. How did medical science fare during those long years of witchcraft and demonology? There is nothing to indicate that things went particularly well for any branch of science. Although the doctor had managed to appease the church and avoid the wrath of the universities, he still feared the devil and public opinion. Ignorance reigned supreme and unquestionably, and the thoughtful man was in constant danger. Intellectual initiative was penalized everywhere. We know this because few important things have come down to us from the Middle Ages. There were also honest doctors in those days. Many of them traveled throughout Europe, consulted with leading practitioners in various countries, and exchanged secret formulas that had proven successful. They had learned that they could not rely on universities for practical information. They graduated for the sake of caution and security, and then, protected by the illuminated pamphlets that detailed their privileges, each one progressed according to his personal abilities. But these doctors lived in constant danger. If their cures were too effective, they could be accused of witchcraft and handed over to religious courts. Progressive practitioners were also in constant danger from other doctors, who might be, and usually were, jealous of their successes. These rivals could accuse them of malpractice and take them to civil courts, which were no less dangerous than the clergy. Apothecaries were, for the most part, corrupt and forged prescriptions, regardless of the consequences for patients. As a result of the chemist's criminal activity, many physicians prepared their own medicines and returned to the ancient practice of cultivating herbs in their own gardens. This led to open warfare between the conscientious physician and the unscrupulous apothecary. In such an emergency, the apothecary would accuse the physician of being in league with the devil. When this rumor spread through the city, the population, including many of the physician's own patients, would turn against him, throwing stones and garbage in the streets and forcing him to leave town. It required considerable strength to practice medicine under such conditions. A medieval apothecary, during a period of open warfare between the conscientious physician and the unscrupulous chemist, prays, "Hear us, O Lord, and sleep lightly. Let thy eyes rest upon us at all times, the causes of pests." The church and the state held profound theories, but physicians had to confront facts that were the direct result of these flawed theories. For centuries, Europe was ravaged by waves of bubonic plague. Entire regions were depopulated, and every medical facility was stretched to its limits. Thousands of doctors died from the plague, which spread like wildfire through cities and towns. It was useless for medieval physicians to preach hygiene. The plague was generally considered a religious calamity. The faculty of the Paris College of Medicine believed the plague was the result of a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn over the Indian Ocean, but the more learned among them agreed that the devil was the true cause. Most physicians in the Middle Ages were deeply religious and accepted the teachings of their church without question. They believed in a personal God and devil, as was the custom of their time. But gradually, over a period of centuries, the thoughtful physician began to observe the relationship between disease and unhealthy environments. They realized that those who believed most strongly in the devil had less need for this belief to explain their ailments. This newfound power of observation resulted in a gradual divide between the church and science. By the 15th century, the devil had lost considerable ground. His existence was still acknowledged by most, but for the enlightened minority, the Prince of Darkness was slowly fading into the realm of myth. But if Satan had lost his power over the minds of the thoughtful, his annoyance in the field of learning can scarcely be overstated. When the physicians of a certain town determined that a nearby swamp was the cause of a local epidemic, the local clergy were equally certain that the devil was to blame. To arbitrate this dilemma, the physicians concluded that the swamp was the direct cause of the fever, but the devil was the direct cause of the swamp. The ultimate cure for ignorance is knowledge. Around 1440, Johannes Gutenberg of Mainz invented the printing press. According to some of his contemporaries, Gutenberg employed the devil as his first printer, and the Prince of Demons personally assisted him in the publication of the Great Bible. Regardless of this, the printing press was the greatest force in pulling the world out of the Middle Ages, but it was also necessary to break the power of scholasticism once and for all. At the University of Basel, Paracelsus burned the writings of Galen and Avicenna in a public ceremony. The old era of empirical medicine was drawing to a close. Leonardo da Vinci was already performing dissections for artistic purposes, and a few years later, Andreas Vesalius published his great textbook on human anatomy. Nothing could stop the movement from advancing. Paracello, the mystic doctor, Paracelsus of Hohenheim, the textbook burner, was the greatest metaphysical physician in European history. Theophrastus Paracelsus was born in 1493, a year after Columbus discovered the Antilles. His father was a physician, and Paracelsus, as a young man, received the benefits of a university education. if indeed the prevailing educational system offered any such benefit. After finishing school, the young physician began his true education. One of the fortunate circumstances that shaped his character was a trip he made to Constantinople, where he was able to study with Muslim physicians. It is not often that a serious student of science is also a man of action, but these two extremes were dramatically blended in the personality of the man who called himself Paracelsus, to indicate that he differed greatly from the Greek philosopher Celsus. His contemporaries described Paracelsus as rude, boorish, bombastic, and fanatically egocentric. He was not attractive in appearance and made no effort to cultivate an engaging style. He preferred arguments to discussions and loved nothing more than an opportunity to insult prominent scholars. Paracelsus traveled extensively and was particularly interested in the healing traditions of gypsies, witches, herbalists, and alchemists. He studied astrology and demonism, talismanic magic, and Kabbalah. He was interested in sympathetic medicine and magnetism, and it is said that he carried a piece of the mysterious alchemical master Azoth in the hilt of his sword. For Paracelsus, only results mattered. In an era when most sought to uphold the dignity of theories, for this audacious Swiss physician, all physical and magical means were justified if they contributed to the patient's recovery. He cured dropsy with antimony rings, and when a man was wounded, he would rub an ointment on the weapon, not the wound. Paracelsus's books were dictated to his disciples, and published not in the medieval Latin of scholars, but in Low German, so that all who could read in their native tongue could study the problem of health. To the horror of the other professors, he also lectured in German, considering it more important to be understood than to be impressive. For these heresies, and for the even greater sin of succeeding in managing diseases that had never responded to treatment, Paracelsus earned the eternal gratitude of suffering humanity and the equal hatred of his medical colleagues. In the end, the respectable and proper physicians could no longer tolerate the troublemaker who publicly announced that his neck knew more about the healing arts than all the doctors in Europe combined. To this insult he added the further harm of taking difficult cases, solemnly pronounced incurable by the most learned, and restoring the health of the sick. It is said that Paracelsus was killed in a fight, but I have had the privilege of examining several ancient books and manuscripts, and they are unanimous in stating that in 1541, the great physician was murdered by a professional assassin hired by jealous and vengeful doctors. Despite his mysticism and magical practices, Paracelsus is currently honored as a great pioneer of medicine, but the scientists who venerate his name rarely study the metaphysical methods that were the true foundation of his greatness. Paracelsus, the first physician of the modern world, was, like most of those who have led humanity toward truth, a mystic and a visionary. The Protestant Reformation. A vital factor in the development of modern metaphysical healing was the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. Even now, after 400 years, it is difficult to fully estimate the consequences of this upheaval on the body of the Christian faith. The Protestant reformers not only decentralized the power of religion, but altered every form of worship. Moreover, they created entirely new sects, dominated by new viewpoints, and divided by a confusion of conflicting doctrines. Like most who desired emancipation from tyranny, these Protestants immediately created tyrannies of their own. In their zeal, they were guilty of nearly all the defects with which they had stigmatized the Church. Again, it was not a matter of sincerity, but of a fundamental inability to meet the challenge of progress. When John Calvin had Michael Servetus burned at the stake for a theological dispute, it is difficult to reconcile such an action with the Protestants' claim that they sought freedom to worship God according to the dictates of conscience. Or perhaps it was conscience itself that was the root of the problem. In any case, the Reformation did not end in tolerance, It merely initiated a series of smaller fanaticisms and began a movement towards separation that resulted in hundreds of arbitrary cults, with little kindness among them. Puritanism created serious difficulties in the psycho-emotional aspect of human nature by depriving people of participating in the pomp of religion. The grandeur, splendor, and glory of the church were lost to those who went to seek their own path of faith. Gone was the infallibility of the popes. Gone were the princes of the church in their scarlet robes. Gone were the Gregorian chants and masses. Gone were the great cathedrals with their priceless rose windows. Gone were absolution and the confessional, and the apostolic succession disappeared. All of this was swept away from the lives of Protestants, and nothing solemnly beautiful was put in its place. But it is not the point of this present work to argue for the virtues or vices of the Church, or the spiritual reality or unreality of its rituals. These pages concern themselves rather with the psychological consequences of depriving the human consciousness of religious ceremony and symbolism, and of the emotional exaltation that comes from participation in such rites. Puritanism chose to adopt an attitude of extreme austerity. Beauty found no place in its concepts. Everything religious became monotonous and colorless. The new churches were mostly sterile and stingy. The virtuous dressed in somber black and developed a stubborn devotion to notes and titles. Martin Luther threw his inkwell at the devil while translating the Bible into German. The Prince of Evil was still at work, and the medieval church never confronted him as fiercely as the Protestants. After Jonathan Edwards finished one of his fiery sermons in Old New England, a deacon approached him and said, "Dr. Edwards, is there any hope for any of us?" If the Latin sermons of the Middle Ages made no sense to the illiterate, the English sermons of the 18th century were equally meaningless to the educated. Imperturbable men in square-toed shoes sat for hours on rustic benches, listening to various theologians who denounced every human impulse as infernally inspired. And children listened with pale, frightened faces to the terrible words of doom, their hearts still too young to distinguish good from evil. The doctrine of eternal damnation in the name of a loving God ruined the arts and thwarted the sciences. There was no longer beauty or hope, and even human goodness could be a weakness that endangered the immortal soul, many of men and today's older women have suffered all their lives from that strange disease in their spirits resulting from Puritan homes, the separation of the paths. With the arrival of the 19th century, religion, medicine, and mysticism, which had been associated since the beginning of recorded history, went their separate ways. There was no room for mysticism in those small, tidy red brick churches, shaded by stately elms, where amiable clergymen preached well-worn sermons on beloved verses of Scripture. Great orators like Henry Ward Beecher and DeWitt Talmage drew crowds, and evangelists of the caliber of Dwight Moody and Charles Spurgeon converted thousands. But these men were not touched by that mystical divinity like those who, like Francis of Assisi, preached their sermons to the birds. Nor was there room for metaphysics in the distant vaulted temples of science, where mathematically minded physicists pondered the plane of the space-time continuum. Charles Darwin and Thomas Huxley ruled in the realm of the mind, and with the entire material world to explore, there was no time for the whims of the spirit. The emergence of mystical organizations within the framework of modern life is a direct result of 3 centuries of Protestant Christianity and 100 years of materialistic science. The spiritual force at the root of things cannot be denied. Blocked by the organized literalism of religion and science, the metaphysical energies in human consciousness must break through the intellectual barriers erected by humankind and create new channels so that ancient truths do not have to die. The sages of ancient India reached across time and space and nurtured a Brahmin in the West. This was Ralph Waldo Emerson, America's only great philosopher, and the stirring spirit of the New England transcendentalists. Visions came to Joseph Smith, and the religion of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was born. Spirits knocked on the walls of the old Eddy Brothers farmhouse, and perennial spiritualism became modern spiritualism. Phineas Quimby, heeding Christ's exhortation to heal the sick, taught men the power of truth within themselves. Andrew Jackson Davis spoke with spirits from beyond death and learned from them the mysteries of Summerland. A little later, H.P. Blavatsky brought esoteric Buddhism to prosaic New York. If modern materialists are unhappy with the revival of ancient mystical cults, they should remember that they have no one to blame for this condition but themselves. Had these scoffers taken a moment to think soberly about the natural structure of human beings, they would have realized that metaphysics is necessary for the survival of civilization. Not ridicule, but thoughtful consideration. But worldly scholars lacked the temperament for this more reasonable approach. Protestant sects did not perpetuate the Christian ministry of healing, and the medical field had distanced itself from the last vestiges of magical practices. Psychologists are beginning to realize the magnitude of this error. Humanity was deprived of a spiritual comfort essential to its well-being, and nothing was offered in return to replace this loss. We can do no better than to refer to a statement made by the distinguished Swiss psychologist Carl Jung in a recent interview. He said in essence that it was unnecessary to psychoanalyze Catholics because they had the confessional. Most doctors have little time to sympathize with their patients' personal problems, however. It is the sick who have the greatest need for compassionate understanding. This is why the old-fashioned family doctor, now vanished from modern practice, was often more successful than the best-informed modern practitioner. The average clergyman has not received training in psychology and can offer some help to those with troubled lives. Tragic experiences have brought this situation to the public's attention, and in recent years, those struggling with their own problems have turned to psychologists with hope for relief. But unfortunately, many of these mental health professionals suffer from a materialistic fixation and can only offer Freudian formulas for problems that Freud himself never understood. Those who found no help in the churches of their faith turned to other beliefs for guidance and inspiration. They revived ancient cults, studied the scriptures of other nations worshipped in strange sanctuaries, and welcomed missionaries from Eastern religions with open arms. The churches cracked down on these pagan practices, but the blame lay right at their own doorstep. Those who have found answers to their questions will search no more, but those who have not found what they need will continue searching, and no power in heaven or on earth can stop them. And the same is true in the field of medicine. The various non-medical healing schools survive and flourish only because a great many men and women are dissatisfied with the theories and practices of orthodox physicians. Instead of trying to understand the reasons for this popular trend, the medical authorities simply lament their disapproval and use every means available to prohibit the practice of non-medical healing. But vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God, and history have proven beyond a doubt that the will of the people cannot be denied. The unchanging purpose of humankind is to restore the spiritual foundations of its world. The great English physicist Sir James Jeans admitted that the mechanistic theory of life has failed, and that it is necessary to restore intelligence in space. Materialism has failed humanity, society, and the universe. Human instinct, wiser and more ancient than all sciences, knows that creation is a mystery of the spirit, and that those who wish to solve the enigma of themselves must find the mystical paths that lead to God. Pythagoras. Pythagoras of Samos was initiated into 14 different schools of esoteric religious philosophy and treated illnesses by reading certain verses from Homer's Odyssey to his patients. He also advised those who lacked the mental or physical capacity to study higher mathematics. Pythagoras' research on the therapeutic effect of music is being reconsidered, and interest in color therapy and perfumes continues, as it is now known that the pituitary gland is particularly sensitive to fragrances. Pythagoras, 6th century BC, taught at his school in Croton the occult healing systems practiced by the priests of various Eastern cults. Chapter 5. Modern healing cults. Classification according to their methods: occult healing, magnetic healing, mystical healing, mental healing, physical healing. Classification according to their methods. There's something almost awe-inspiring about the certainty with which spiritually minded people can differ on the same things. Gathering humanity's religious beliefs into a single book chapter becomes nearly as difficult as bringing believers together under one roof. Most healing cults resent the proper classification of their methods, since each feels it is specially favored by the gods, completely unique, and infinitely superior to all others. For the same reasons, none likes being grouped with various rival sects in any literary pattern. As it is not my desire to fuel discord or cause discontent among metaphysicians, it has seemed convenient to classify the various healing systems according to the methods employed, rather than by their names or claims. For comparative purposes, metaphysical medicine can be organized under 4 general headings: occult healing, mystical healing, mental healing, and physical healing. In some cases, a group or practitioner employs more than one method. When this occurs, the combination should be separated into its basic components, and each should be considered under its appropriate heading. In Europe and America, most healing cults are nominally Christian, but the techniques they employ may derive from ancient pagan or modern Asian sources. Since metaphysical healing has been practiced with equal success in nearly all the world's major religious systems, there is nothing to indicate that one faith has been favored over another in its ability to heal the sick. If miracles appear to be more frequent among non-Christian peoples, it is because the religious spirit is more vital among them than it is among us. Occult healing. Occultism is the ancient science that deals with the hidden forces of nature, the laws that govern them, and the means by which these forces can be brought under the control of the enlightened human mind. An occultist is someone who believes in the reality of esoteric sciences, has studied them academically, has decided to perfect their own consciousness according to their rules, and may or may not practice the rituals and formulas of transcendental magic. The occult sciences are the secret teachings of the world's saviors, prophets, seers, sages, and initiated philosophers, who instructed their closest disciples. This body of esoteric tradition has been passed down to us through secret religious societies, which therefore possess the most sacred and unique knowledge of supraphysical energies, faculties, functions, and powers. The most important occult sciences are magic, demonism, exorcism, alchemy, Kabbalah, astrology and other forms of divination, spiritualism, magnetism, esoteric cosmogony and anthropology, the metaphysical physiology of the human being, and extrasensory perceptions. The well-informed student of occultism is one of the most universally learned human beings. They must know all the major systems of philosophy and religion in the world, both Eastern and Western, and must have a deep understanding of the ancient sciences and arts. There is no place for the superficial thinker in this field, and if one were to arrive by accident, it would be wise for them to leave with haste. According to the rules of occultism, all particulars must be suspended from universal principles. In the case of healing, any particular cure must bear witness to some general philosophical pattern. That is, it must be explainable in terms of the relationship between the macrocosm and the microcosm, between the universe and humankind, Strange as it may seem, there is no place for miracles in the sciences of magic. Occultism defines a miracle as an effect whose cause is unknown, but the cause must be equal to the effect it produces. Knowledge is power, and esoteric knowledge grants the greatest power, which appears miraculous to the ignorant. The great occultist Paracelsus said, "The beginning of wisdom is the beginning of supernatural powers." Buddha taught that the universal disease of humanity is ignorance, and that wisdom is the only remedy. This statement perfectly summarizes the occultist's attitude. It is their conviction that the world is governed by absolute and immutable laws. To know them is to be wise, to abide by them is to be happy, and to break them is to die. Many of these laws are unknown to material scientists, whose faculties are not developed enough to explore the four-dimensional views of spiritual space. But it is through these strange laws and the knowledge of them that so-called miracles occur. Occult healing can be defined as a method for treating various disorders of the mind, soul, and body through a higher understanding of the spiritual laws that govern health. The remedies may be physical or metaphysical depending on the case, but the philosophy involved is entirely different from that which guides medical practice. Occultism does not teach that good health is a natural birthright. Health is reserved for those who know how to live and have the courage to live according to their knowledge. The ignorant can never be well, because if they recover from one ailment, they immediately fall victim to another. Health, like happiness, must be earned. Those who wish to enjoy it must take the necessary steps. Many of the occult medicine systems practiced in antiquity have no apologists in the modern world, but those that seem to have revived it, I will include in this study. For some reason difficult to understand, the greatest of all classical healing institutions, the oracles of Asclepius, have no counterpart in today's society, and the entire field of dream therapy is ignored. Pythagoras of Samos, 6th century BC, was initiated into 14 different schools of esoteric religious philosophy. He traveled to India and was accepted into the Brahman mysteries at Ellora and Elephanta. He is the only non-Hindu to have been so honored. At his school in Croton, Pythagoras taught some of his most advanced disciples the occult healing systems practiced by priests of various Eastern cults. Pythagoras treated illnesses by reading certain verses from Homer's Odyssey to his patients, but it is not recorded whether it was the words of the poem or the master's voice that possessed the healing power. This Samian sage also advised those who were mentally or physically incapable to study higher mathematics, because the contemplation of ordered sequences of numbers would subdue the untempered impulses of the soul and body. It is interesting to note that Emanuel Swedenborg is said to have become clairvoyant as a result of his addiction to arithmetic problems. Pythagoras' research on the therapeutic effect of music was revived after World War I, and experiments were conducted with men suffering from what was known as war neurosis. The results were positive enough to spark considerable interest, and the topic is still under consideration. Greek music was composed according to musical modes, and the Archon of Athens had such faith in the hidden power of musical composition that a person could be exiled as an enemy of the state if they wrote a song in the wrong mode. The Pythagoreans were probably the first to experiment with color therapy, based on the principle that it is possible to nourish through the eyes. From this same premise, they placed various symmetrical geometric solids for the sick to view, so that the soul could benefit from the harmonizing influence of perfect proportion. They had learned this latter method from the Egyptians. Perfumes, incense, and various magical fumigations were also used for healing purposes. These were combined with the utmost care, and it was believed that the scents passed through the nostrils directly to the brain. It is now known that the pituitary gland is especially sensitive to fragrances, so further research in this area could be beneficial. A French perfumer has created what he calls a scent scale, similar to a musical scale, and claims to be able to compose harmonious perfumes using it. Astrodiagnosis and astrotherapy have been practiced for thousands of years, and by the mid-18th century, most physicians used astrology. Even Lord Bacon recognized that plagues could be predicted from the movements of the stars, and he reportedly fainted whenever there was a lunar eclipse. René Descartes did not convert to this practice, but he grudgingly admitted that astrology could not be refuted. Under the authority of Hippocrates, Galen, and Avicenna, medieval physician astrologers developed an elaborate system of correspondences between the planets and herbs, chemicals, and mineral medicines. They organized these according to the rules of sympathy and antipathy, and assessed illnesses based on the affected planet and its aspects. Saturn's illnesses would be compensated for with Jupiter's remedies, and critical days would be determined by the moon. 17th century England produced several important writers and practitioners in the field of astrological medicine. Dr. William Lilly, Dr. Nicholas Culpeper, and Dr. Henry Coley were the most famous of this group, and these men enjoyed the patronage of Sir Elias Ashmole, to whom some of their astrological books were dedicated with his permission. An interesting aspect of astrological diagnosis was the ancient practice of casting a horoscope at the exact minute the doctor received a urine sample from the patient. This allowed the physician to choose the appropriate remedies to bring when visiting the sick person. Several modern metaphysical organizations use astrology to diagnose illnesses and disorders related to spiritual healing. It doesn't appear that many of them attempt to prescribe medication using this method, but those who believe that astrology is not worth considering may find the words of Dr. Carl Jung unsettling. "I use astrology," he wrote to a friend, "in my difficult cases." The tradition of alchemy is also long and venerable. It flourished in Egypt, India, and China long before the beginning of the Christian era, and is aptly described as the mother of chemistry. Not all alchemists were goldmakers, and it is recorded that the most important ones were persecuted after being accused of transmuting base metals. The great quest of alchemy is the elixir of life and the universal medicine. A few, such as Ramon Lull, Basil Valentine, and Albertus Magnus, claim to have found the philosopher's stone, but if they did, the formulas remain hidden in the archives of secret societies. In their quest beyond chemistry, alchemists made many important discoveries along the way, and these have enriched the pharmacopoeia of modern medicine. Sir Isaac Newton was so impressed by alchemical literature that he amassed a magnificent library on the subject for his own use. When this library was eventually broken up, it was discovered that many of the books contained annotations made in Newton's own hand. Alchemy is too obscure a subject to find a place in popular metaphysics, but occasional references are made, and human regeneration is sometimes called spiritual alchemy. However, there are several advanced occultists who conduct alchemical experiments in private laboratories. It has been a privilege to meet some of these men and to closely study the work they are doing. They should not be confused with the gentleman who was selling nuggets of the philosopher's stone some years ago. Kabbalah is the secret doctrine of Israel, descended from oral tradition through the priesthood of Moses, the great lawgiver. During the Middle Ages, both Jewish and Christian scholars were immersed in Kabbalistic speculations about the origin of the universe, the letters of the holy name, and the hierarchies of blessed and infernal angels. The Sefer HaZohar, the Book of Splendors, has only recently become available in English. This is the great text of Kabbalah, and those who wish to study the subject should not accept any other authority. Popular numerology is not Kabbalah. Ceremonial Kabbalah includes an elaborate development of the science of demonism. There are various spells and formulas for binding spirits so that they must obey the magician's will. Some rabbis, especially in the Old Country, exorcise demons and cure spirit possession using Kabbalistic rites. Many Orthodox Jews have nothing to do with Kabbalah, but most of the metaphysical philosophers of their tradition have been influenced by its teachings. All forms of transcendental magic contain elements of Kabbalah. The French occultist Abbé Louis Constant, Eliphas Levi, invoked the spirit of Apollonius of Tyana for Lady Bulwer Lytton with the aid of Kabbalistic spells. Ceremonial magic is mentioned here because it teaches that spirits and demons can be summoned to cure illnesses and prolong life. 17th century Rosicrucian physicians combined alchemy, astrology, Kabbalah, and magic in their secret system of therapy. Among these Rosicrucian doctors were Robert Fludd, Michael Meyer, and John Hayden. In his Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, Elias Ashmole notes that a Rosicrucian physician was able to cure the young Duke of Norfolk of leprosy. Some modern Rosicrucian movements include healing among their activities, but the methods they employ do not necessarily align with the theories of the ancient order. Magnetic healing. Magnetic healing was known to the Egyptians, Greeks, and Hindus, and was practiced by them in ancient times. The witches of Thessaly treated the sick with metal rods called fingers, and the Chinese highly valued amber for its magnetic properties. Later, in Europe, lodestone was held in similar esteem. Magnetic healing and animal magnetism were revived in the 18th century as a result of Franz Anton Mesmer's experiments with his famous bathtub. Some magnetic healers, or mesmerists as they are now called, use instruments to store or direct the flow of magnetic currents. Others rely entirely on the magnetism of their own bodies, directing it with mental impulses or hand movements over the patient's body. Since the development of electrical therapy, various magnetic devices have been offered to the public. The best known are magnetic belts that plug into an electrical outlet, which are often called horse collars by lay people. The belief that those who have passed on can help the living with their health is an ancient doctrine that has survived into modern times. This is known as spirit healing, and it typically involves consulting a medium who attempts to contact a disembodied intelligence to obtain the knowledge necessary to prescribe the appropriate remedy. This practice is based on the belief that the dead who have passed into the spirit world have discovered secrets about the hidden aspects of nature, beyond the understanding of the living. People naturally sensitive to psychic impressions may attempt to communicate directly with a guide on the inner planes without resorting to a professional medium. I have been struck by several cases of people who received instructions on healing and solutions to their own health problems from entities they contacted through mediumistic means. The ancient belief in the existence of certain superhuman beings called initiates and masters is widely accepted among modern metaphysicians. A number of sects have arisen that incorporate these adepts into their healing methods. Adepts are disciples of the occult sciences who have attained great knowledge and power and have been initiated into secret schools of esoteric wisdom. In India, these initiates are called Mahatmas, and they are believed to dwell in remote places far from the abodes of ordinary mortals. These great souls are generally considered teachers and sages, but they occasionally perform miracles of healing. In the modern occult world, adepts are regarded with the same kind of veneration that Catholics feel for their saints. Prayers are directed to the masters with the full conviction that these initiates will be aware of the supplications, regardless of distance, and will respond with appropriate demonstrations of supernatural power. The wondrous stories that have circulated about these initiates and masters are well suited to increase faith in their ability to heal all kinds of illnesses, and belief in these superhuman beings has become a potent force in modern theories of metaphysical healing. There are several Hindus and other Asian metaphysical teachers in this country who incorporate healing philosophies into their doctrines. Most of these practitioners combine diet, exercise, and rhythmic breathing in their occult treatment methods. They emphasize the power of the mind over the body and teach various esoteric disciplines. This group generally believes that bodily ailments can be corrected by purifying the system and increasing spiritual energies through meditation and the practice of yoga. Mantras, Hindu hymns proclaiming the inseparability of gods, monads and atoms, are also used by these traditions, and their teachings make reference to Kundalini, the universal life principle that manifests everywhere in nature. Because there is little organization among Eastern masters, it is very difficult to provide an adequate summary of their methods. The diagnosis and treatment of illnesses through the study of the aura, or magnetic emanations from the human body, was practiced by the priests of ancient mystery cults. The Kilner screens, invented by Walter John Kilner, B.A., M.B., Cantab, MRCP, etc., then an electrician at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, have brought this subject into the field of scientific research. Dr. Kilner was able to devise a simple method for stimulating the human eye to perceive auras, even for people without clairvoyant training. European occultists are conducting many interesting experiments suggested by ancient writings of alchemists and medieval magicians. Current trends include the possibility of capturing planetary rays in dew, research into the Druidic tradition of mistletoe as a medium for astral light, and the investigation of crystals formed in human blood through the drying process. Diagnosis by divination has also been widely practiced. The eccentric genius Jerome Cardan wrote a book on the occult meaning of moles on the body and lines on the forehead. The late Count Louis Hamon, Chero, told me that he could determine a person's condition of health by the lines on their hands and the condition and shape of their nails. The Chinese can accurately predict the number of children a woman will bear from the small lines at the corners of her eyes, and also determine lifespan from the angle of the cheekbones. All these methods belong to the general field of the occult sciences, and if they are true, they bear witness to the laws that operate in the human body. An occult healer is a person versed in all the unknown arts and philosophies that affect human health. Their methods may seem strange to the uninitiated, but the practice of metaphysical, mystical healing. Mysticism can be academically defined as the belief that direct knowledge of God and truth is possible for man through an expansion of his spiritual vision towards union with the substance and essence of divinity. In common practice, mysticism is a simple and permanent faith in God's power to accomplish all things necessary for human life and happiness. A mystic is one who has a mystical attitude towards life and rejects formal religious theologies, believing that one can approach God through personal devotion and contemplation of divine truths. A mystic may or may not believe in a personal God. For most Christian mystics, the deity is to some extent personal, capable of liking and disliking, and able to hear and answer the prayers of the faithful. Among Eastern mystics, the divine nature is generally considered impersonal, and is worshipped as universal reality, being glorified rather than supplicated. The mystic arts are the traditional disciplines through which human consciousness is attuned to the world spirit. These disciplines are largely derived from the lives and teachings of great mystics who have attained cosmic consciousness. The popular mysticism practiced in modern metaphysical movements has been called the doctrine of the heart, and followers of these cults are taught to live each day with the emotion of divine love at the highest level of their consciousness. Unfortunately, the average student of these subjects does not grasp the meaning of the words divine love, and can only assume that they signify a sublimated kind of human affection. Therefore, they try to love God as they might try to love another human being, and the result is anything but true mysticism. It is difficult to define in words a spiritual process that has no equivalent in the external life of humanity. Brother Lawrence defined mysticism as the practice of the presence of God. This is a noble statement, and it certainly inclines the mind in the direction of mystical conviction, but it is not the complete definition. Perhaps we could add that mysticism is participation in the divine nature of being. Participation means sharing in common, or taking part in essence, quality, or action. There can be no true mysticism without this awareness of God. The practice of mystical disciplines should result in the attainment of the mystical state. A strange enthusiasm, from the Greek enthusiazein, to be possessed by God, rises and fills the consciousness of the mystic, who is then swept away by a powerful ecstatic emotion of exaltation or ecstasy. While transported in this way, one feels at one with God and part of all that lives. As the mystic becomes more sensitive to the sympathies present throughout nature, it becomes increasingly difficult for him to resist the emotional or mystical content of life upon him. Dante could not contemplate an open rose without being completely overwhelmed by its beauty, even to the point of losing consciousness in an ecstasy of exquisite pain. The great saint and mystic of the East Indies, Sri Ramakrishna, spent several hours a day in euphoric contemplation of the motherhood of God. In the last years of his life, Ramakrishna could not think or speak of the beloved mother of the world without entering samadhi, the superconscious state. When this state of mind overcame him, his disciples had to support his body to prevent him from falling to the ground. The earliest forms of Christian mysticism were largely dominated by the emotion of suffering. People sought to draw closer to Christ by experiencing his pain. This was mysticism through agony. The exquisite sweetness of Christ's great suffering gave rise to the extreme austerities and physical disciplines of the monks and church fathers. "Oh, how sweet it is," cried Saint Alphonsus, "to suffer and die embracing the cross." Modern mystics rarely reach the extreme of Sufi or dervish ecstasy. They are content to follow the paths of prayer and faith. They believe that God is truly an ever-present help in times of trouble, and they turn to Him whenever pain or sorrow strikes. The only truly mystical attitude of these individuals is their firm conviction that the deity can be reached through personal supplication. Mystical healing, in practice, is often healing through faith, and it depends on the stimulation of faith in human nature. The psychological and biological results arise from sincere conviction, transcending the body's functional processes and organic structure. Through faith, the power of God is released within human chemistry to work miracles and renew the life of the body. The mystical healing practices of the Catholic Church are closely associated with venerated temples, relics, and sacred images. Through pilgrimages to holy sites and meditation on the symbols and objects of faith, the body's chemistry can be profoundly influenced. Modern scientists tend to believe that faith-based healings are psychological rather than spiritual, but they acknowledge that they do occur in cases where medical intervention fails. Regarding the mystical healings at Lourdes in France and Sainte Anne de Beaupré in Canada, Dr. Howard writes, "The relics and shrines still heal today as they did in medieval times. Even modern doctors have sent some of their patients to be treated in this way." All illnesses due to hysteria or melancholic states of mind are susceptible to such cures. Even men and women suffering from incurable diseases are temporarily improved by the hope they are given. According to reports, Dr. Alexis Carrel converted to Catholicism after witnessing cancer wither away in an instant at the Shrine of Lourdes. Therefore, it would seem that faith can achieve miracles beyond simply improving morbid psychological states. The power of holy relics and the intercession of the saints is supported by the words of Scripture. According to Acts 5:15-16, the shadow of St. Peter healed the sick, and Acts 19:12 states that the cloths that had touched St. Paul's body had the power to restore health. Therefore, it is under the authority of Christ's words and the testimony of the disciples that faith healing is practiced, including in Protestant Christian denominations and metaphysical Christian sects. These organizations widely believe that spiritual healing of illness is possible for those who have complete and abiding faith in Christ and His ministry. Other religions hold similar beliefs regarding their prophets and saviors, and examples of faith healing resulting from sincere conviction in God's healing power can be found throughout the world. To effect faith healing, it is generally necessary to intensify the religious emotions of the afflicted person in one or more ways. Faith healing in Orthodox Christian sects is frequently part of evangelical revivals, during which the evangelist works on the emotions of the audience until a state close to crisis or ecstasy is reached. Religious healers often work in a context that matches emotional intensity. Many religious organizations teach the value of prayer for directly healing physical ailments. The person suffering may pray for themselves, or prayers may be offered on their behalf by a priest or clergy member. It is also common for a group or congregation to unite their prayers on behalf of a sick person. It is also a Christian belief that any sincere and devout person may address the deity in prayer for the sick, and all people may pray for the health of others and for loved ones. When respected national leaders are afflicted, it is customary for congregations of all denominations to unite in prayer for the recovery of these prominent figures. Healing by the laying on of hands is a very ancient form of mystical therapy and has been widely practiced among Christian religious groups. The healer generally believes they possess a spiritual power derived from God, which they are able to transmit to others by touching their heads or affected body parts with their hands. Through this contact, the spiritual virtue is transferred to the sick person, achieving healing through the direct power of God. The laying on of hands is sometimes confused with magnetic healing, but the two methods are completely different in their basic principle. It has always seemed to me that the great power of faith lies in the changes it can bring about in our lives and thinking. When a person converts to a religious belief through the conviction of their own conscience, the mental, emotional, and physical aspects of their nature are profoundly affected. Illnesses that were a direct or indirect result of their previous patterns of life and thought can cease because their new way of life no longer permits them. We're all familiar with the type of doctor who tells a difficult patient, "My good friend, what you need is a change of scenery." Chances are, the doctor is just very tactfully admitting their desire to end their relationship with the case. But the advice can be much deeper than it seems. Human beings fall into routines, and these can lead to illness and disease. Many doctors have had the embarrassing experience of encountering a healthy, vigorous person on the street whose face is vaguely familiar. "Don't you recognize me?" the stranger says. "I'm the guy you told 10 years ago that he had 6 months to live." He then learned that the patient was so terrified at the prospect of an early death that he was determined to recover at all costs. So he went to a ranch in Nebraska, and his improvement was immediate. The journey west and the outdoor life certainly did him a great deal of good, but in addition to a vigorous life, his recovery required a complete change of perspective, both mental and emotional. New faces, different values, and different standards of living all played their part. The young man became a new person, and this new person was no longer subject to his old ailments, so he recovered. If such changes can be achieved by altering personality patterns in a new environment, even more can be accomplished by changing mental and emotional patterns. People can become allergic to themselves. The only appropriate remedy for such cases is for the individual to change themselves. Under certain conditions, religion can induce this change. An old gentleman once told me that he had been cured of inflammatory rheumatism by joining a certain church. His friends ridiculed the idea, but it was probably true. Inspired by a newfound religious zeal, he had endeavored to amend his moral ways, and as a result, his physical health was purified, mental healing. Thousands of years before Freud, Adler, and Jung, the healers of Africa, the shamans of Asia and the Americas, and the priest-physicians of classical Greece were aware of the psychological factors that influence human life. But because these ancient occultists incorporated their knowledge into mystical and metaphysical rites and used religious and philosophical terms to explain their conclusions, modern scientific thinkers ignore the whole subject, unwilling to descend from the heights of their self-important materialism to examine the superstitions of the ancients. Therefore, it took until the 19th century AD to rediscover what the 19th millennium BC already knew. A considerable portion of psychological knowledge remains under the sway of religion. In recent years, a number of religious psychological movements have emerged, attempting to reclaim the spiritual values of psychology from the materialism of most academic professionals in the field. Perhaps one reason why scientific psychology has fallen short of the hopes and expectations of its enthusiasts is that, in borrowing its principles from ancient temples, too many religious and philosophical aspects of doctrine were rejected and ignored. Mentalism teaches that the various phenomena of life are of mental origin, that the universe itself is a creation of the mind, that the laws of nature originated in the world of thought and are administered by cosmic intelligence, and that God is the mind, or intellectual principle that governs all things and not a spiritual being. Mental science is a collective term used by metaphysicians to encompass that aspect of spiritual culture by which the individual improves themselves through the personal application of the universal laws governing spiritual thought. Furthermore, it posits that mind, not matter, is the true reality, and that the illusion of matter can be controlled by mental power. According to this teaching, material life is a false posture maintained by a mind that ignores its potential to master all material substances and conditions. Mental healing is any form of spiritual psychological therapy that operates on the principle that the mind can correct the ills of disease and afflictions and restore health by reconditioning the mental outlook. Mental healing differs from academic psychotherapy in the emphasis placed on the spiritual aspect of the mind, and in the teaching that the spiritual mind is capable of achieving a state of perfection in the consciousness of the individual. It is important to note that a central tenet of most mental healing cults is that health is the natural state of humankind, and illness is the result of accepting mental error. In this respect, modern doctrine differs significantly from the ancient philosophical belief that sickness and disaster are natural to all mortals until they perfect their standards of living. For metaphysical mentalists, God, the spiritual mind of the world, desires the health of humankind, and illness stems from incorrect thinking, not from other spiritual, moral, or physical causes. God desires that all creatures be healthy and prosperous, but to achieve this state, they must realize that this is the divine will, and make it their daily task to reaffirm this fact in every thought and action. Mentalism as a religion is represented by a wide variety of sects, each differing from the others in terminology and minor details of their methods, but all agreeing that the mind is the source of happiness and misery, health and illness, even life and death. A few groups have attempted to demonstrate that it is possible to conquer death, the last great enemy, by firmly establishing the mind in the understanding of the eternity of life, but to date, none of them has been able to extend human existence beyond the usual physical lifespan. There is a strange contradiction in the practices of many mentalist sects. While they affirm the unreality of material things, they are deeply committed to achieving as much success and power as possible. Most mental healing cults seem to include personal unhappiness, marital difficulties, and financial setbacks among physical ailments, and they address these problems alongside illness and disease. And most mentalist sects are very aware of prosperity, even as they deny the actual existence of the material world. All mental healing is a form of suggestive or self-suggestive therapy, but some practitioners will not admit it. They insist on putting their practices into elaborate formulas and methods. Good results are often achieved because the person who adopts a more optimistic attitude about themselves and their activities is more likely to succeed in life and business. Furthermore, because we expect things to improve for ourselves, we are quicker to recognize and seize opportunities. The most widely practiced form of mental therapy is healing with affirmations. In metaphysics, an affirmation is a statement of a spiritual truth intended to overcome a false attitude held in the realm of the mind. Illness is assumed to have no real existence, but rather to be an illusion resulting from the individual's failure to maintain clarity of their spiritual perspective. Affirmations are most often made by the patient themselves, but a professional can also be consulted to determine the most appropriate affirmation for the specific problem. Affirmative statements are not intended to cure any external agent, but rather to clarify the understanding of one's own spiritual sufficiency. Typical affirmations for health include, "I am radiantly healthy and I am perfect, therefore I cannot be ill." Negation is the opposite of affirmation. In some groups, instead of using a positive health statement, they employ a negative statement of negation. For example, the patient might say, "I don't feel any pain," or "my leg doesn't hurt." In many mental healing systems, affirmation and negation are used together in a logical sequence. Examples of such statements would be, "There is no disease, therefore I am not sick, and I am only sick because I believe I am sick." The purpose of these statements is to convince the individual that what they have accepted as illness is merely their own mental image. A topic is a general statement of spiritual facts or beliefs. In healing, a commonplace is used as an abstract basis for a particular assertion. It serves as a moral argument to justify belief in the therapeutic value of a statement of metaphysical truth. The patient may memorize the topic themselves, or a practitioner may recite or read it to them. The patient might say, "God wants all his creatures to enjoy good health," or "all things are perfect in the divine mind." These are topics because they are generalizations. They serve to rationalize certain attitudes toward life's behavior. In the field of New Thought, some maintain that healing thoughts can be sent to a person at a distance. This is called treatment in absence. If the patient is visualized, held in the mind, or thought about intensely, contact is established regardless of distance, and the healing treatment or affirmation will be effective. This method is popular among individual practitioners and in large organizations. Requests for help are submitted in writing, by telegram, or by telephone to the healer or group, and healing vibrations are sent to address the need. Large metaphysical religious orders have departments dedicated solely to healing requests and related matters. Most of these groups have developed their own specialized techniques for practicing treatment in absentia. The latest development in this field is the recent innovation of healing by decree. In this type of mental therapy, the patient or healer commands the divine or its agencies to bring about the desired cure immediately and completely. In some cases, the power of the decree is amplified by several people decreeing together to achieve the purpose. Decrees are generally spoken formulas directed to some superhuman being or force. For example, "I decree perfect health," or "I demand instant healing for my injured foot." There are mental healing groups that don't deny the reality of the material world, but rather teach how to develop a dominant personality in order to achieve anything they set their minds to. These individuals practice the process of acting with willpower to achieve their desires. Again, this is a method for increasing their courage, thereby overcoming the natural or unnatural limitations of their character. Schopenhauer's doctrine of the will to power is evident in these groups and can lead to dictatorial tendencies. All those who are interested in the power of the mind over the affairs of their lives would do well to remember the words of Pythagoras, who refused to ask favors of the divinity because everyone knows what they want, but only the gods know what they need. Émile Coué's famous formula, "Every day, in every way, I am getting better and better," is an example of mental healing that is not necessarily religious, but is simply autosuggestion popularized by the masses. One of the most ingenious devices, though still in its early stages, is an automatic phonograph that plays suggestive affirmations while the person is asleep. It is based on the belief that the subconscious mind is more receptive to impressions, while the conscious mind is at rest. Hypnotic therapy belongs to the class of mental healing. It is the technique of creating an artificial receptivity in the mind so that suggestions to correct character defects and functional ailments are more easily assimilated by the intellect. The practice of hypnotic therapy is encouraged in Europe and recognized as an important branch of psychology, but this field is virtually ignored in America, probably due to unfortunate religious prejudices rooted in a complete misunderstanding of the principles involved. Hypnotism is a mechanical art, not a spiritual mystery, as many believe. Students of the processes behind suggestion or mental healing should consider the often cited story of the dyspeptic farmer who went to the local doctor for something for his stomach ailment. The doctor gave him a prescription and told the man to take it first thing in the morning. A few days later, the patient returned and said that nothing had helped him so much. A little questioning revealed that the farmer hadn't taken the prescription to the pharmacist to fill it, but had instead eaten the paper. Physical healing. It may seem incongruous to include a discussion of physical healing in a chapter dedicated to metaphysical therapy, but it should be remembered that it is possible to hold religious convictions about purely physical practices. Most religions have become involved in the personal lives of their followers, sometimes with disastrous results. Diet, for example, plays a significant role in the spiritual convictions of many people. A number of metaphysical sects forbid their members from eating certain foods because they consider them detrimental to spiritual development. These restrictions should obviously be applied with caution, as they are generally entirely arbitrary and do not take into account the individual's specific needs. Vegetarianism was not originally a Christian doctrine. It came to Europe and America from the East, where it is practiced by various mystical sects, primarily Buddhist. It is not certain that the Buddha himself preached a meat-free diet, but most of his followers consider it essential for a virtuous life. It is said that Buddha died as a result of eating contaminated pork, given to him by a poor peasant who could offer nothing better to the great master he loved. Buddha's attitude on this occasion was that the duty of a saint is to accept without question any food offered by sincere people, and to eat it with gratitude, even if the result is death. This part of the doctrine would simplify the lives of hosts who welcome vegetarians to their homes for dinner. Religious organizations may also prescribe the clothing that members must wear. The style, color, and quantity of garments worn may be determined by an unchanging tradition, or by more recent revelations. In many cases, the attire of sect members is neither artistic nor hygienic, and may be detrimental to their health. Thus, the current trend ranges from prudishness to nudity, from being overdressed to scantily clad. In the open-air parks of Germany before World War II, Nacktkultur, nudism or naturism, took on the proportions of a spiritual belief, and it is permissible to consider nudism as a form of spiritual healing if the devotees of the cult believe in the divine power of the sun and agree with the gymnosophists of the East Indies, for whom the path without clothes is the direct route to God. It is still a debatable question whether human sexuality is a matter of biology or theology, but until the mechanics of the Immaculate Conception are somewhat simplified, biologists have the upper hand in their arguments. Celibacy is a very ancient religious practice that can have a profound effect on the physical lives of human beings. Some sects mandate complete abstinence for their members, while others permit sexual relations only for the purpose of reproduction. Several Eastern masters include simple calisthenics and warm-up exercises among the disciplines of their practices. The physical culture of Eastern mystics is so rigorous that few Westerners can adopt the correct postures used in Tantra and Yoga. Anyone who sits cross-legged and tries to keep their body lifted off the ground for an hour using only the strength of their arms and hands will realize the tremendous physical stamina that Asian saints have developed. Because of their spiritual convictions, metaphysicians frequently oppose the entire theory of allopathic medicine. They do not go to the doctor, nor do they take drugs, serums, or glandular secretions, and many oppose vaccination. Some go so far as to refuse surgery altogether. Others permit it if there is no other way to preserve life, but oppose minor operations such as tonsillectomies. There are considerable conflicting feelings between mystics and physicians, and each group holds rather unfavorable opinions of the other. They do not appear to have any general antipathy towards dentistry, but a leading figure of the New Thinking, some years ago, when asked why he did not wear dentures and show off a new set of teeth, replied, "I would, only I haven't had the time. Natural physiotherapy methods are generally preferred by metaphysicians, who often employ osteopathy, chiropractic, homeopathy, and naturopathic treatments. They also accept electrical and radiomagnetic devices as indicative of their drug-free approach. However, there is considerable opposition to the use of X-rays for therapeutic purposes." A medical writer dissatisfied with the whole mystical attitude about healing includes osteopathy among the cults of faith, because the founder, Dr. Andrew Still, once said, "God is the father of osteopathy, and I am not ashamed of the child of his mind." Biochemistry, developed by Wilhelm Heinrich Schussler, and later given a metaphysical explanation by Dr. George Carey, with its 12 cellular salts and their zodiacal correspondences, has many followers. With the exception of some mentalists, members of various spiritual groups believe in the sanctity of the human body and teach that it should be preserved and cared for in every way possible. They emphasize good nutrition, adequate ventilation, light and loose clothing, sufficient exercise, sunbathing, hydrotherapy, moderation in all personal habits, outdoor life, and wholesome recreation. For these people, living in nature is a religious virtue. Although a few go to dubious extremes in their adherence to these principles, the majority maintain a sound and constructive policy in harmony with the best traditions of spiritual and physical culture.